Okay. Hello. Dear guests, visitors, organizers, it's a pleasure for me to be here. Liepāja has always been a special place for me as an artist and as a person who loves to visit here in the summer times. So, I think I have to say some words about photography at all, because we live in always in challenging times, but for photography especially, it's challenging times, since we have the opportunity to generate at least everything, or almost everything. It sometimes depends how we understand what is everything, not photographing. And I think that it's absolutely important to talk about photography, because it's not about only gathering beautiful or not so beautiful images, and not to sharing images about something between photographers, but it's absolutely important nowadays to just for everyone to talk about photography. And photography is always about communication, it's always about sharing ideas and being together as society. So that's the reason why I'm so happy that almost for 10 years, it's the first time when in Latvia we have a conference dedicated to photography, which is strange. We need it much more often, I guess every second year. It could be good. And not only for photographers, but for general public and for academics and all other persons. So what I did, I decided to be kind of creative, but probably boring or extremely boring with my presentation. I decided to dedicate it to synthetic images and work with algorithms which are dedicated to kind of big language models and audio records and to visual image generating like Midjourney. And I decided to train Cloud, which is one of the most powerful big language models according to parametric tests, and to discuss some, let's say, 12 publications about synthetic images and about kind of challenges which we face as as visual community. And after that, I got some text with which I worked, and I created from this text prompts and used them in a Midjourney to generate visualizations for presentation. And afterwards, I recorded this text, not with my voice, with artificial voice. So, sorry and excuse me if I will be absolutely boring. So now you will have kind of video speech, which is partly my, partly not. And it's like result of this discussion. So I have to somehow switch it on. And the first slide, it's 1 minute. It's a kind of silence. It's a context of, I hope it works. Yeah, it's a context that images which are kind of illustration of what we have everywhere now. And I don't consider them as a threat, but it's somehow threat and somehow very interesting, and we are changing as photographers, we are changing our business, we are changing our approach to how we work with photography and what is authorship of images and what is documentary, and which is most kind of, I think, specific question what to do with documentary style images by very prominent photographers who are starting to work with synthetic images. That's it for that moment. And of course, one of the first most popular personalities in synthetic images art photography world, Boris Oldeksen, with few.
So what did I do?
So
I used Claude AI to have a discussion about synthetic images and photography, and that discussion formed the basis for the text. For the presentation slides, I created the illustrations in Midjourney based on the presentation text as prompts. Later, I recorded the text in 11 Labs using voice simulation. The shift from natural to artificial intelligence in visual culture, whether in professional or amateur production, marks one of the most significant changes of our time. At the heart of this historic transformation remains a familiar and trusted medium: photography. This transition goes beyond technological progress to raise essential questions about truth, representation, power, and the essence of visual knowledge. As synthetic images become more advanced and widespread, they challenge not only our understanding of photography but also our entire framework for interpreting visual culture and its connection to reality. This crisis goes beyond technical issues of detection and verification. It involves broader concerns about power, democracy, and cultural meaning-making in an increasingly digital world. The paradox of synthetic images thus signals what might be called a crisis of visual epistemology, one that requires new analytical tools and theoretical frameworks. When algorithms can produce photorealistic images indistinguishable from camera-based photographs, traditional ideas of truth and falsehood, authentic and artificial, real and simulated, become inadequate for understanding what is truly at stake. This crisis goes beyond technical issues of detection and verification. It involves broader concerns about power, democracy, and cultural meaning-making in an increasingly digital world. We must move beyond simply asking whether an image is real or fake, and instead examine the deeper epistemological foundations of how we understand visual knowledge itself. A fundamental conceptual confusion plagues the current discourse on artificial intelligence-generated imagery. The widespread use of terms like AI photography or algorithmic photography reveals our struggle to understand a phenomenon that goes beyond traditional categories but appears to fit within them. As Roland Meyer notes, adding attributes such as intelligent, generated, or algorithmic to photography leads to a dead end, because even a correct attribute cannot save a false noun. The emergence of alternative terms like synthography and promptography signifies more than just semantic change. It indicates an understanding that we are dealing with something fundamentally different from photography as traditionally known. These new forms of media require new vocabularies and conceptual frameworks that can explain their unique properties and social roles. The essential difference between light-based and data-based image creation cannot be overstated. Photography, whether analog or digital, involves what Liv Hauskin describes as a fundamental process where light from the subject enters the camera lens and is focused on the image sensor, which detects and converts the light into an electronic signal, which is in turn transformed into an image that can be processed, edited, stored, and shared. This process, however complex and mediated, preserves what we might call an indexical relationship to the world, a causal link between the image and the phenomena it records. Even heavily manipulated digital photographs retain some trace of this original light-based capture. Synthetic images, by contrast, operate through what Rosemary Lee describes as data-based aesthetics, where the production of images is understood as mediated through rather than representative of data. This mediation fundamentally alters the ontological status of the image. While photography captures and records visual information from the world, synthetic images generate visual data from databases of previously existing imagery. The relationship to the external world becomes, as Lee notes, indirect, secondary, derivative. This marks what Lee refers to as a qualitative leap that not only justifies but requires us to speak of something revolutionarily new. This distinction has significant implications for how we understand visual knowledge. Photography's epistemic authority has traditionally depended on its ability to perform what Hauskin describes as dual functions: depiction and detection. Photographs not only show us things, but also enable us to analyze and extract, or imagine ourselves extracting, information from the recorded visual data. They serve as both representations and records, allowing scientific analysis, legal evidence, and historical documentation precisely because they maintain this indexical relationship to the world. But let us remember that at the same time, we are neurologically wired to believe in what we see. Synthetic images, regardless of how sophisticated their appearance, cannot fulfill this detection function. They can replicate the appearance of photographic recordings, but they fail to capture the essential ability to preserve and transmit visual information from the real world. The idea of platform realism offers vital insights into how synthetic images function, both aesthetically and culturally. Meyer describes platform realism as a set of images that represent a certain visual conception of the world, created by large AI platforms. This is not realism in a traditional sense, but rather the enforcement of specific aesthetic frameworks by technological platforms with particular commercial and ideological aims. Platform realism functions through what Meyer describes as pre-selected training data that mirrors the preferences of a very narrow demographic: white men in North America. The visual tastes of this group are embedded into AI systems and then replicated worldwide, resulting in a form of aesthetic colonization. The resulting imagery shows what critics call AI slop: mass, taste-driven, cheap images that tend to become uniform and dull. This aesthetic uniformity results from the algorithmic processing of training data that has already been selected based on specific criteria. As Meyer explains, AI models are fed images that have already been evaluated and sorted, often based on metrics like click-through rates and engagement that prioritize certain visual conventions over others. The result is not random sampling of visual culture, but the systematic reproduction of particular aesthetic preferences that become naturalized as realistic or appealing. The widespread belief that AI training datasets are randomly sampled from internet images conceals a more worrying truth. These systems learn from carefully curated content that already reflects certain commercial and cultural preferences. This pre-selection process largely determines what synthetic images can produce and the aesthetic standards they follow. AI training datasets do not randomly collect images from the entire internet. Instead, they mainly draw from particular sources that reflect certain cultural biases. Pinterest, for example, offers images that have been pinned and shared based on aspirational lifestyle themes, heavily favoring minimalist, white, middle-class American styles. When AI generates dream kitchens, it consistently produces white cabinets, marble countertops, and open-plan layouts. Not because these are universal ideals, but because they dominate Pinterest's engagement-driven environment. Similarly, Instagram content tailored for visual appeal on mobile screens is overrepresented in training data. Stock photography sites add another layer of commercial filtering, ensuring that AI training data prioritizes commercial over cultural considerations. The sorting process works through algorithmic ranking based on user behavior metrics. Click-through rates decide which images are prioritized in training datasets. Still, these rates favor attention-grabbing elements like bright colors, high contrast, and dramatic compositions over subtle or nuanced photography. Landscape images with dramatic sunsets consistently outperform contemplative or documentary imagery, leading AI systems to reproduce oversaturated, melodramatic visual styles. Social media engagement metrics, likes, shares, and comments, establish additional hierarchies of visual content. Platform algorithms boost high engagement material, ensuring that images designed for shareability become overrepresented in training data. This process systematically excludes visual traditions that do not translate well into viral social media content, regardless of their cultural importance or artistic value. This pre-sorting process creates a feedback loop where AI aesthetics start to define what appears realistic or appealing. The systematic reproduction of engagement-optimized content normalizes particular visual preferences as universal standards. When AI-generated imagery floods social media and commercial platforms, new content creators begin mimicking these aesthetics to gain engagement, which then influences the next generation of AI training data. The implications go beyond aesthetic preferences to address fundamental questions about cultural representation and visual knowledge. Working class aesthetics, non commercial photography, and cultural traditions that resist viral optimization become systematically excluded from AI generated imagery. This exclusion accelerates cultural homogenization while marginalizing visual traditions that do not conform to platform optimized frameworks, revealing how seemingly neutral technological processes encode and amplify existing inequalities in cultural representation. For over a century and a half, photography has served as what German media theorists call a truth machine that provides us with reliable and trustworthy documents and evidence. This truth claiming authority, while always problematic and contested, has nevertheless laid a foundation for scientific knowledge, legal proceedings, journalism, and historical documentation. The digitization of photography began to undermine this foundation by breaking the analog links between images and the world. Digital manipulation meant that truth was no longer an automatic, technically guaranteed feature of the image, but became a matter of journalistic integrity of certain media, agencies, and individuals with impeccable reputations. Synthetic images complete this transformation by removing even the pretense of an indexical connection to the world. Unfortunately, visually synthetic images still resemble the same level of indexical authenticity as photography. Synthetic images operate based on what media theorists identify as a shift from truth to probability, where visual assessment becomes a matter of statistical likelihood rather than evidential certainty. This probabilistic logic reflects the mathematical foundations of machine learning systems, which function through pattern recognition and statistical modeling rather than direct recording of phenomena. The consequences of this shift go well beyond technical questions of image authentication. As German critical analysis warns, when the credibility of images fails, science suffers as well, as we are experiencing with the climate crisis. Only since the images of droughts, floods, and melting glaciers have come into existence does it exist at all. The relationship between visual evidence and knowledge creation is more intimate and vital than often acknowledged. Hauskin's distinction between detection and depiction functions becomes crucial here. Photography's epistemological authority stems not solely from its ability to show things, but from its capacity to record information that can be analyzed and verified. This highlights fundamental differences between human and machine vision. Adversarial examples in machine learning vividly demonstrate these differences. Images that seem identical to humans can be classified very differently by AI systems through alterations as minor as a single pixel. Such instances reveal that machine vision functions through analyzing mathematical relationships between pixel values rather than through visual interpretation of the depicted objects. Synthetic images, no matter how photorealistic, cannot offer this detection function. They can replicate the appearance of photographic recordings, but they fail to capture the essential ability to preserve and transmit visual information from the real world. The development and use of synthetic images cannot be fully understood without considering the political and economic interests of the corporations that control major AI platforms. These large tech companies behind major AI platforms are characterized by authoritarian politics and a desire to dominate globally. The creation of synthetic images mainly serves not artistic or communicative purposes, but the extraction of value from existing cultural production and the consolidation of control over visual meaning-making. The authoritarian logic of AI platforms is most evident in their approach to intellectual property and copyright. When asked about using copyrighted material for training data, OpenAI's Sam Altman responded with typical dismissiveness. You can clap about that all you want. Enjoy. This attitude reveals the contempt these companies hold for legal and ethical constraints on their operations. The corporate appropriation of cultural production through digital data extractivism, the systematic gathering of human creative output to train systems that may then compete with and potentially replace human creators. This process involves the estimated collection of more than 12 trillion photographs that have accumulated in history's memory and are stored as a sedimented mass of data. This extraction process fundamentally alters the relationship between creators and their work. As Lee notes, the transition from the light image to the data image is accompanied by the abolition of the author, once again, and this time for good. If each new image is a combination of existing ones, then every creator of pictures used for data extraction by AI becomes a potential author. The concept of collective authorship highlights how traditional ideas of individual authorship diminish in importance when each generated image can incorporate elements from millions of existing works. This creates a commons without explicit consent, a forced collectivization of cultural production that mainly benefits the corporations managing the platforms. The global reach of these platforms allows what Meyer describes as visual and cultural colonization. American cultural norms are woven into AI systems through English language training data and the aesthetic preferences of Silicon Valley developers. Not only are the images used by AI rooted in American ideas, but the texts describing these objects are always in English. Everything else is just a subordinate translation. This linguistic and cultural dominance operates at multiple levels. The training data reflects American perspectives and priorities, the descriptive language shapes understanding and portrayal of concepts, and the algorithmic optimization reproduces the preferences of American users and creators. The outcome is the homogenization of global visual culture driven by algorithmic preferences. The concentration of power in a handful of major platforms leads to a concentration of cultural visibility. Content that cannot be effectively processed by algorithmic systems or that does not align with platform preferences becomes increasingly marginalized. One of the most worrying aspects of synthetic image technology is its potential to serve as a foundation for propaganda and disinformation. The ease with which realistic-looking images can now be generated has profound implications for political discourse and democratic institutions. As Meyer notes, AI images are so easy to use for propaganda purposes because they are easy to describe. And with the help of description, any idea about reality can be turned into an image. The concept-first approach of synthetic image creation makes propaganda systematically easier to produce. Unlike traditional propaganda, which required significant resources and expertise to create convincing visual materials, AI systems allow anyone to visualize political ideas and social anxieties quickly and cheaply. Meyer gives the example of German Christmas markets with barbed wire. There are no such images in reality, but there is a prevailing feeling in society that can be quickly turned into AI-created images. This ability to envision unrealized fears and fantasies marks a new form of propaganda. Traditional photographic propaganda, regardless of how manipulated or selectively shown, was limited by the need to record real events or stage scenarios. Synthetic images remove these limitations, allowing the creation of persuasive visual proof for events that never happened and situations only present in imagination. The muddying the water tactic becomes especially potent with synthetic images. This involves the strategy of undermining certainties, sowing doubt, and making lies acceptable. When convincingly realistic images can be produced for any political aim, the overall trust in visual evidence begins to decline. This results in what researchers term the liar's dividend, a situation where just the possibility of fake images makes it easier for malicious actors to dismiss genuine documentation. The democratization of propaganda creation using AI tools has concerning implications for political discussion. Creating fake images for propaganda no longer requires considerable effort. Anyone can do it. There is no longer a need for extensive support systems and funding. This technological democratization takes place amidst a landscape of concentrated platform control, leading to a paradox where anyone can produce propaganda. Yet, only a few corporations have control over the tools and distribution channels. The aesthetic qualities of platform realism amplify propaganda's effectiveness. The tendency towards political and aesthetic kitsch means that synthetic images often follow simplified, emotionally charged visual norms. The rapid and large-scale creation of synthetic images facilitates new forms of coordinated disinformation campaigns. Unlike traditional propaganda, which required time and resources to produce and distribute, AI systems can generate thousands of variations on propaganda themes in real time. Appreciating the proper use of synthetic images involves moving beyond basic questions of technical authenticity to consider the functional context and genre expectations of visual media. Different visual genres have distinct epistemological expectations and serve various social roles. Houskin's analysis of Amnesty International's Columbia campaign offers essential insights into how the same synthetic image technology can be suitable or problematic, depending on its specific use and the expectations it creates. The photos sparked widespread criticism from human rights organizations and the press, with critics claiming that using AI-generated images could undermine the credibility of human rights defenders and set a concerning precedent. The Amnesty case involved 4 AI-generated images produced to commemorate the second anniversary of police violence against protesters in Colombia. However, Houskin's analysis shows that the controversy mainly centered on one image that seemed to mimic journalistic reportage, while 3 others functioned more suitably as political posters. The 3 poster-like images portrayed anonymous figures in a manner consistent with political poster traditions, what Susan Sontag describes as images that promote iconic images of anonymous heroes. These images served symbolically rather than as documentary evidence, using AI generation to create representative figures instead of claiming to document specific individuals. The problematic 4th image, however, seemed to depict a particular moment of police violence in a style closely resembling photojournalistic reportage. As Houskin explains, this image looks more like an image from another type of visual series, the journalistic reportage, creating expectations about evidential authenticity that synthetic images cannot satisfy. The case of Boris Eldagson's Sony World Photography Award case offers another instructive example of genre confusion. Eldagson's AI-generated image was submitted to and won an award in the creative photography category, sparking significant controversy when the artist revealed its synthetic nature. While presented as art rather than documentation, the image still drew on conventions associated with family photography and historical documentation. As Houskin notes, Eldagson's image mimics an existential photographic moment that might be highly valued in a family album, through its depiction of 2 women, the elder grieving, perhaps caring, with a hand on the shoulder of the younger, in a style reminiscent of 1940s amateur photography. When revealed to be AI-generated, viewers experienced what Houskin describes as feeling cheated, made a fool of. It is a hoax. What you felt was just sentimental. The artist played you. This reaction reveals what Houskin identifies as photography's existential dimension. Its ability to evoke a sense of an existential moment, a moment of human presence, a presence that has been there. The distinction between different photographic genres is vital for understanding the suitable use of synthetic image technology. Houskin's analysis indicates that AI-generated images could effectively replace stock photography in illustrative settings, where the purpose is symbolic rather than evidential. In cases where stock photography can be considered journalistic sound, she argues, one should ask whether one could just as well use AI-generated images and mark them, with the image being considered an illustration. Nonetheless, genres relying on photography's detection function, such as news photography, scientific imaging, legal documentation, and human rights reporting, cannot be adequately replaced by synthetic alternatives without fundamentally changing their epistemological status. These uses demand what Hauskin refers to as camera-based recording, because they depend on photography's ability to preserve analyzable information about the world. Understanding synthetic images involves recognizing that visual realism is historically contingent and culturally constructed, rather than inherent or inevitable. What we regard as realistic or photographic often reflects learned conventions instead of a direct reflection of visual experience. Julie Turnock's research on photorealism in cinema offers valuable insights into how visual conventions become naturalized. As Turnock shows, contemporary photorealism frequently reproduces aesthetic conventions from the 1970s, rather than mimicking current photographic technology. Today's photorealism bears the stamp of a certain 1970s photorealism, Turnock argues, noting that today's photorealism is not in sync with today's photographic technology. This temporal disconnection reveals that photorealism functions more as a learned aesthetic convention than a direct simulation of photographic reality processes. Effects artists often start with something based on computation or science, but it is almost always tweaked, stylized, or transformed to suggest how it would look if photographed. The result mimics not what cameras record, but what audiences have learned to expect photographic images to look like. Turnock's analysis of lens flares offers an obvious example of this process. The addition of lens flares to computer-generated imagery functions as a chief indication that digital designers of photorealistic special effects are more often than not referencing the cinematography of earlier films, not, as is often assumed, the perceiver's actual visual experience of the world. These effects reference other images rather than direct visual experience, creating what amounts to simulations of simulations. This creates what Turnock refers to as a form of conditioning, where, through constant repetition, we have been conditioned to accept this specific historical aesthetic as perceptually real. The tendency towards kitsch and nonsense, perfectly styled and yet so uniform and redundant, reflects the statistical averaging processes through which AI systems learn visual norms. These systems replicate the most common and predictable elements of their training data, resulting in the paradox that advanced AI produces, above all, artificial stupidity with all its empty and used images. The challenges presented by synthetic images require proactive resistance strategies that go beyond simple rejection or nostalgic calls to photographic authenticity. Effective resistance must critically examine the technology itself while creating alternative frameworks for visual culture that serve democratic rather than corporate interests. Nam June Paik's approach, "I use technology to hate it better," provides a valuable model for critical engagement. As media theorist Eric Salvaggio notes, artists must also realize how these technologies work to understand better why they shouldn't be used and why they should be opposed. This demands technical literacy combined with critical analysis of the social and political context in which these technologies operate. Critical engagement with AI image generation must function across multiple temporal scales. When developing critical AI theory, we should operate on multiple temporal levels. There are events we can respond to immediately, but we can also consider them from a broader perspective. Immediate reactions to specific developments must be balanced with long-term historical and theoretical analysis that can reveal underlying patterns and structures. The creation of local and autonomous alternatives is a vital strategy for resistance. In the first decade of the 21st century, with the emergence of initial generative AI models, there were many more opportunities for artists to use machine learning locally and independently without relying directly on large AI platforms. The current dominance of centralized corporate platforms is not inevitable, and can be challenged through alternative approaches. Community-controlled AI development offers opportunities for creating systems that serve local needs and values rather than corporate profit motives. Such systems could be trained on culturally specific datasets, operate according to community-defined ethical guidelines, and remain under democratic control rather than corporate ownership. The technical infrastructure needed for these alternatives exists. What is required is the political will and organizational capacity to implement them. Technical approaches to authentication and verification, such as the Content Authenticity Initiative, are significant advances in safeguarding the detection function of photography. These systems embed metadata about image origin and processing into digital files, creating tamper-evident records of how images are produced and altered. However, these technical solutions must be complemented by institutional and cultural changes that support their adoption and effectiveness. Developing visual literacy for the synthetic age requires educational strategies that go beyond mere detection training to include a critical understanding of how images operate in social and political contexts. Cultural resistance must also tackle the centralization of cultural visibility within corporate platforms. Supporting minority and marginalized visual cultures necessitates establishing alternative spaces and systems for artistic production and distribution that operate outside corporate channels' control. The notion that AI development is an unstoppable force that cannot be questioned or altered serves corporate interests more than democratic values. Alternative approaches must emphasize human control over technological development and application. The integration of technical, aesthetic, and political factors is essential for creating effective solutions. This integration should be combined with an aesthetic analysis of their cultural impacts and a political evaluation of their social roles to gain a deeper understanding of how AI systems function. Community-led and culturally sensitive technologies offer possibilities for synthetic image systems that prioritize human needs over corporate objectives. Such systems could operate based on community-defined values, support diverse cultural expressions, and remain accountable to democratic institutions rather than shareholders. The rise of synthetic images signifies much more than just technological progress. It marks a fundamental shift in visual culture that requires new theoretical approaches, critical practices, and democratic responses. This transformation transcends issues of technical authenticity to challenge the very foundations of power, knowledge, and cultural meaning-making in our increasingly digital society. The concentration of visual power within corporate platforms poses unprecedented risks to cultural diversity, democratic debate, and human agency in creating meaning. The widespread homogenization through algorithmic aesthetics, the colonization of global visual culture by narrow demographic preferences, and the shift of cultural production into data extraction pose challenges that require coordinated resistance across technological, cultural, and political spheres. However, the current trajectory is not inevitable. Alternative approaches to AI development that prioritize community control, cultural diversity, and democratic principles remain both technically feasible and politically attainable. The preservation of photographic culture amidst this transformation necessitates a careful defense of photography's unique epistemological capabilities, while recognizing legitimate uses of synthetic imagery in suitable contexts. This involves supporting institutional commitments to camera-based practices, developing robust authentication systems, and establishing cultural frameworks capable of distinguishing between appropriate and problematic applications of synthetic technology. The shift towards a post-synthetic visual culture is already underway, but its direction remains contested. The key question we face is whether this change will serve corporate interests of profit and social control, or uphold human aims like knowledge creation, creative expression, and democratic engagement. The outcome depends entirely on the critical work we do now to understand these trends and the alternative futures we choose to pursue. This crucial moment in history demands responses appropriate to its epochal significance. Beyond mere technical solutions, we need cultural innovation, political organization, and theoretical advancement that can envision and cultivate visual cultures worthy of democratic societies. The images produced through these efforts could promote human flourishing rather than corporate extraction, celebrate cultural diversity instead of algorithmic uniformity, and foster democratic participation rather than authoritarian control. The future of visual culture remains fundamentally reliant on human agency and democratic decision-making. The frameworks and practices we establish today will determine whether synthetic images foster human creativity and democratic principles, or primarily serve as instruments of corporate dominance and cultural colonization. The transformation of visual culture in the era of synthetic images is not merely a passive development. It is actively shaped through our critical understanding, creative practice, and collective effort. The stakes are incredibly high. The core of visual knowledge, cultural representation, and democratic dialogue is at risk. Our response to this challenge will shape not only the future of images, but also the future of the societies they help to form. This choice requires ongoing critical engagement with these technologies, complemented by a steadfast commitment to the alternative futures we aspire to create. The transformation of visual culture requires not passive acceptance, but active participation in shaping technologies that serve human flourishing and democratic values rather than corporate extraction and control.
Thank you. Sorry for being so boring, and I hope you will not hate me. I got some questions, one at least, and but I want to say some final words. Since that question is related to that photographers are somehow afraid or hate artificial intelligence, but we actually all, same like photographers and everyone, we're using, at the moment when we're taking mobile phone, at the moment when we open some kind of applications, we use some kind of algorithms which we not control absolutely. So sometimes more, sometimes less. And I'm sure that photographers don't hate artificial intelligence. They use it, but as society or community of photographers, of visually thinking persons, and I guess we all, doesn't matter, we are photographers or artists or just people working somewhere else, not related to photography, we have some collective responsibility how we communicate with each other and some ethical responsibility, and it's very related to artificial intelligence, which somehow narrows are these approaches and ways how we can communicate with each other and what we see, how we react, and what we know about what is said to us or shown to us. So, and especially when we see these photo festivals, which are in the last 2 years very often dedicated to artificial intelligence, sometimes without any kind of discussion about it. What is it? Is it photography? It's not photography. It's synthetic images. How they're related to photography and how they shape audience perception and how it's consumed from our reactions. And not, of course, artificial intelligence, but the persons who own algorithms, who own agencies, who own different kind of institutions who get some benefits from getting clicks, let's say.
Thank you. If you're boring, then why do you have so many questions? The first question is, I will ask you only two, and then during plenary session there will be more discussions. Question number one, you partially reply to that, but still. New technologies in photography have often faced resistance, though the length of that resistance has varied. How long will it take before photographers embrace AI as a tool rather than seeing it as a threat?
But it's being used, actually. I'm absolutely sure everyone of us use it. At the moment when we open Photoshop, we use it. Well, when we using selective focus and when we're using... But of course, there's a difference. The large language models, which gives the opportunity to generate prompts, and later we can create images from actually nothing, from text. So there's some different processes, and they look like photography, but they are not photography. And there are some problems especially with this mobile phone aesthetics or screen aesthetics, when we need what actually Lev Manovich called it as Instagramism. When we need images which are adapted to screen, so it's always small, always shaking. There should be central compositions, there should be larger objects, small details, and they sometimes looks like, well, when we look on fashion photography, it looks like same fashion photography which was in old times printed on a paper, but it's not, because there's much less details. It's absolutely a little bit different compositions, and to higher contrast, to higher color saturation, because we have to kind of keep the ability to viewer to read the image. So, and it's becoming more worse with artificial intelligence. The images become more, let's say, aesthetically primitive. Well, I'm not against it. Okay, people clicking on it, and it's not good, it's not bad, but someone gets profit. So it's a problem.
Thank you. And the second question is, wouldn't comparing AI and regular photography be similar as comparing a meal made by a chef versus mass-produced meals from the factory, where the mass-produced options doesn't have the passion of its counterpart?
Well, maybe yes. Well, I don't know. I think it's absolutely different. Different thing. It's illustration. So it's more related to illustration. It's like more like drawing, or so what we can do. One thing it's taking in a Lightroom, like post-producing image, and the other thing it's Adobe Illustrator, for example, where we can draw actually photorealistic images if we know how to do it. So it's somehow like absolutely different. So I can't. It's even not a meal. It's something like I don't know. It's a box, and the other one is mic. So it's absolutely different objects for me. But well.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.